Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Rick Newcombe. Welcome, Rick.
Well, thank you, John.
Great. Great. I want to tell everybody about the show. Grace Under Pressure focuses on what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we show toward others. And when you do it as a leader, as you will learn from my friend Rick, it's about bringing people together for common cause and acting for the betterment of all. Rick, I want to tell everybody about you. Rick Newcombe is the creator of the Creator Syndicate, and I've known Rick longer than any other guests I've had on this show. We go back 50 years, Rick. So
that is hard to believe.
Yeah, it is. Rick is accomplished what most industry analysts said could never be done. He founded a Creator Syndicate in 1987. The company syndicates journalistic or columnists and cartoonists. Among the names are Ann Landers, Hunter Thompson, Thomas Sowell, Susan Estrick, Robert Novak, Patrick Buchanan, Connie Schultz, and you can tell people on the left, on the right, both spectrums there. They also have noted editorial cartoonists who have won more Pulitzer Prizes than any other comparable company. And those contributors included Herb Block, Mike Lukovich, Stephen Breen, Chip Bach, and many more. I have known Rick started in journalism. He was my editor at a publication we called the Georgetown Voice. And we're going to get into that as we go along. But Rick is also here because he has a brand new book, and shame for me for going half screen here, but it's called The Magic of Lifting Weights. And we'll make the connection to that. So anyway, Rick, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I look forward to our conversation.
You got it. So you are an entrepreneur, a business person, a business professional. What are you hearing? What's the outlook for 2021?
I think 2021 will be a good year, primarily because of the vaccine, and we see the virus numbers dropping like a stone. Now, hopefully there won't be a new wave and all that, but I do think many people are getting vaccinated, and it's a good thing.
Okay.
No, I think the economy will be very strong. I mean, I feel bad for a lot of the lower wage scale workers who work, say, in restaurants or gyms or whatever that have been closed and shut down, and we've got to help them get back. But I think all of this free money right now from the Federal Reserve and the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, plus all of the things that the Trump administration did in terms of deregulation, all of these things will help. I predict 2021 will be a good year.
Well, virus. I remember you back from when you were the editor of our Georgetown Voice, and you were always focused pulling everything together, but you had this business slant, which I think certainly came to fruition with Creator Syndicate. So tell us the story of that.
Well, I had, at the Georgetown Voice, let me just explain that 50 years ago, when you had, you looked a little bit like Led Zeppelin or something, and you were a fantastic photographer. And I loved the idea of, we were part of an adventure. There were a handful of us who founded the Georgetown Voice. And in 1969, in 2019, we all went back to Georgetown. It's amazing that newspaper still comes out. And we created something that has a lasting legacy at the university. And the whole concept was to provide other voices, to get outside the campus, to go see things in Washington, D.C., to allow people on the left and the right. And I really bought into that. I loved that concept. So later in my career, I wound up in newspaper syndication with first the Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and then working for Rupert Murdoch when he bought the third largest syndicate in the world. And then in 1987, I started my own syndicate, Creator Syndicate. I was 36 years old. And one thing I noticed that I had heard from cartoonists was that historically the comic strips were owned by the syndicates. This all started with, the comic strips started. Have you heard of the term yellow journalism?
Absolutely.
So it was William Randolph Hearst, who I really admire as a fantastic publisher in many ways. But he had a comic strip called The Yellow Kid. And sometimes that would bleed yellow on the page. And that's how they came up with the term yellow journalism. And Hearst started the first major syndication company called King Features. And his first syndicated comic strip was the Katzenjammer Kids. And it was enormously successful. It was done by a German cartoonist named Rudolf Dirks, an immigrant. And Dirks said, well, wait a minute, I created these characters. This is, my story, my life. I would like to own them. I don't want Mr. Hearst to own them. So, and Hearst said, no, too bad, I own them. So Dirks sued Hearst, and he lost. And so that set the precedent that syndicates owned the comic strips, the name, the characters, and the likenesses. And this went on until 1987, until I started Creator Syndicate. And a number of cartoonists had filed lawsuits against syndicates trying to get ownership. The most popular cartoonist in the 1940s was Milton Caniff, and he created Terry and the Pirates, which was everywhere. I mean, it was just unbelievably popular. But he wanted ownership of Terry and the Pirates. And his syndicate said, take a hike. And he said, okay, I will. And he did.
Yeah.
And his syndicate was owned by the Chicago Tribune and New York Daily News. And so the startup Chicago Sun-Times, owned by Marshall Field family, in this case, Marshall Field III, said, if you do a comic strip, we'll let you own it. So he created Steve Canyon, which was also very popular. And I syndicated Steve Canyon. I knew Milton Caniff. I remember at lunch, he said, if you start a new syndicate and you're the first major syndicate that allows cartoonists to own their own characters, the name, the characters, and the likenesses, you will revolutionize the industry. And that really appealed to me. So, if you go to an MBA program or whatever, and they say what's really important is to have a niche that is different from your competitors. So we were the first major syndicate to allow cartoonist ownership of their work. And we founded in 1987. And within, a number, at first I was condemned by the other syndicates. They filed lawsuits. These major media companies were threatening. They were very threatened by this. But over time, we prevailed. We became the third largest syndication company in the world. And all the major syndicates now grant ownership rights.
What a great story. And I what's interesting, all too often journalism is considered a dying industry, sadly. And it's people like you who are given an extra life. So I love your entrepreneurial zeal, which you literally have had for your whole life. And because it was new I didn't even know the word, obviously, when I first met you, but you did. And so it was, because you were pushing us to get ads and things like that. So it was terrific. It was a good education for me. So thank you, Rick. Anyway, Absolutely. So let's get to our topic.
The concept of we'll get to weightlifting in a sec, but the concept of other voices is really huge. And, I get the Georgetown Voice online, and I just read an editorial the last few weeks from the Georgetown Voice where they all agreed that the statue of John Carroll on campus should come down. Let's remove it because John Carroll's mother owned slaves or something like this. Now, remember, John Carroll was a Jesuit priest who founded John Carroll University in Cleveland, and he founded Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He founded Georgetown in 1789. Yeah. So if we take our 2021 blinders of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and we apply them to 1789, then we say, oh, let's tear down this statue. Well, I say if you tear down the statue, you may as well shut down the university. That kind of ignorance and intolerance is exactly what I've spent my whole career fighting against. So I wanted to add that.
Well, that's fine. And
There
let's
was not
know.
a single dissenting voice in the voice. If
No.
that had been our day, we would have had some people say tear down the statue, and other people say absolutely not, and we would have had a nice back and forth.
Right.
That's what I don't like today. What scares me is
I want to get into that, and let's stick up for our Jesuit educators. When the story of the Georgetown slavery, his connection to slavery, was known, they started a reconciliation compensation program, which has actually taken off, and it has been quite exceptional. No excuses, but they've owned the issue and made restitution, seeking to make restitution.
Well, some of that is good, and some of it needs to be challenged. One of the people I syndicated, I'm most proud of syndicating for 25 years, was the economist Thomas Sowell. He's at Stanford University. He's retired now. I mean, he retired from his syndicated column at age 85, and I think he's 90 now. But Tom Sowell wrote a sentence or a couple sentences about reparations that I wrote down. It's so brilliant, where he wrote, he was an African-American economist who's written many, many books. And he wrote, have we reached the ultimate stage of absurdity where some people are held responsible for things that happened before they were born, while other people are not held responsible for what they themselves are doing today? I just thought that was such an interesting way to put it.
Right. All right. So let's get to your book, okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So how did we get to entrepreneurship and weightlifting, or did weightlifting contribute to entrepreneurship?
Well, it all started when I was 12 years old, and I saw a muscle magazine, and I was a little kid. I was small for my age, and wanted to make myself big and strong. And I set a goal to look like the bodybuilder on the cover of that magazine. It turns out he was Mr. France. His name was Guy Murzuk. And I really just fell in love with lifting weights. And I tell the story. Well, what happened was during the lockdown, I had time to think about this, and I had been wanting to write about it. And it's an interesting story about how, to me, it's interesting, about how
Rick, the platform is yours. Of course it's interesting.
how I was just so obsessed with this idea of building a lot of muscles.
Yeah.
And at some point, it may be 3 or 4 years later, after working out so hard, I gave up. And I talk about why, what kinds of influences and what was going on, and why did I quit? But every so often I'd be drawn back into it. And then I tell the story about how when I was 27 years old, I was the Baltimore bureau chief of UPI, United Press International. And we got press releases all day long. And one of my jobs was to go through the press releases and look for something that was newsworthy. We got one from Simon & Schuster promoting this man named Arnold Schwarzenegger and his book called The Education of a Bodybuilder. So I asked for a review copy, which means you get it for free, because in case you write a review, then the publisher is happy. So I read the book and I really enjoyed it. And it brought back all these memories. And I thought, wow, how did Arnold stick with it? And I didn't stick with it. So I called Simon & Schuster and said, if he ever comes to Baltimore, I'd love to interview him and write a story about him. Well, they got back to me pretty quickly, and he came out and we had breakfast. I was 27, he was 30. I remember standing in line. We were at the Hilton Hotel at the Inner Harbor. They were just starting to develop that in Baltimore. And Arnold looked like Frankenstein. I mean, he had a turtleneck and a tweed jacket, and he was just so massive and giant. And I had been used to those bodybuilders, but I had forgotten. Plus, he was especially big.
Yeah.
And he was a little bit famous in those days. So we sat down at breakfast, and some woman came over and paid for our breakfast because she said, "You've inspired my son to exercise, so I wanted to pay for your breakfast." So he wasn't totally unknown. At that point, the movie Pumping Iron had come out and a few others, but he was still trying to get known. And he talked about visualization at breakfast. He said that he referred to his third eye, my third eye. He pointed to his forehead and said, I said, "What's a third eye?" And he said, "Well, it's how I want things to be." And he said, "I will become the #1 movie star in the world." And I said, wow, bigger than And I just immediately thought of Robert Redford and Paul Newman. I said, bigger than Robert Redford or Paul Newman? And he said, oh, much bigger than those guys. I'm going to be bigger than Charles Bronson. And I thought, oh my, how clueless. If he thinks Bronson is the number, he doesn't even know he's competing against. How's he going to become number one? Well, it turned out when Bronson died a few years ago, I read in his obituary that in the 1970s, he was the number one movie star in Europe. And so Arnold saying that made perfect sense, but I didn't know that then. So then eventually I was hired at the LA Times, and I just kept flirting with this working out. I mean, I was working out a little bit, and I kept thinking, how come I reached that? I reached all of my goals, but I never reached the goal of looking as good as Guy Mirzik on the cover of Strength and Health. So I set that as a goal. And I tell the story about how I achieved that. And it's not easy. It takes years and years. But then what happened is, here I am, 70 years old, suffering from the lockdown like everybody else, and what I called house arrest.
Yeah. Grandfather too. Let's throw that in as a
grandfather. Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things I thought was, if nobody else reads this book, my grandchildren might. Just tell the story for your grandchildren. And I love a conversational writing style, so I tried to do that.
Very conversational. Yes, absolutely.
And the goal is that when at 70, what I realized was that lifting light weights with good form, it just is amazing how it can change your life. So if you are a baby boomer and you've exercised off and on over the years, my recommendation is get a personal trainer. Read the book, get a personal trainer, use light weights, 5-10-pound dumbbells, do 20 reps, good form, nonstop for 30 to 60 minutes. And you just won't believe how good you feel. See, so often with exercise, so much of it is there's a pushing everybody to go to their max. No pain, no gain. Yeah. Well, that's nonsense. If your goal is to exercise for good health for the rest of your life, the best workout is the one you like enough to keep doing it.
And you have a thought in this, and it intrigued me. Explain muscle memory from a weightlifter point of view.
Well, when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, lifting weights so hard and drinking protein shakes and all this stuff, I didn't know anything about setting short-term goals. And so we had pictures taken. And I was so disappointed because I didn't look like the muscle men on the cover. When in fact I had made tremendous progress, and so I didn't know how to feel good about the progress, so I just gave up. That was one of the reasons. Sorry. So when I started training again seriously with Franco Colombo, within 6 weeks, within 8 weeks, 2 years, within 1 year, I just had all of those gains, all of that effort I did when I was 12, 13, 14, my body just exploded with muscles, much more so than if I had never picked up weights in those years. And that's called muscle memory.
Right. Now, too often we think of weight training for men, but it's not, is it?
Absolutely not. No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I remember Ronald Reagan's daughter, when he was president, Patty Davis, would be at World Gym at 5:30 in the morning, lifting light weights with good form. She was very quiet and very hardworking. I admired the way she worked out. There were plenty of other women too. And then now it's exploded.
No, and it's, what's great about it is muscle tonality. I kind of think at my age is lifting weights as, I use the term, shame on me, prevent decay. Is that right or wrong?
That's 100% right. Initially when I was writing the book, I said, well, this is a fountain of youth. And then I got shingles in the eye. Oh, what a painful experience. That's caused by stress. Yeah. So, and all the doctors told me, you've got to get the shingles vaccine, because if you get it once, you could still get it again. Yeah. So since then, I've gotten the shingles vaccine. But what I wrote was, getting older, I mean, our eyesight, 50 years ago, you and I probably weren't wearing glasses. We've had just anything. I mean, a lot of people lose their hair. They naturally, it's easy.
I still have it.
It's easy to get fat as you get older.
Look at me, Rick, come on.
especially if you don't exercise. So it's really not a fountain of youth. But what it is a foundation for energy for your golden years. I walk with a spring in my step. Now, the people who take bodybuilding and weightlifting too far and take a lot of steroids and things, when they're 70, they're either dead or they can barely walk. So that's not good.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that.
Well, and so what's the, I'm going to dig here. And I think you've alluded to it, but I'll give you a chance. So you talked about the spring in a step, but it makes you feel better. Is there a spiritual essence to this, Rick?
That's so interesting. Such a good question. I believe there is. What I just read where Jerry Seinfeld said he's discovered two things that have changed his life: lifting weights and meditation. And they totally make sense to me.
Yeah. I'm an amateur meditator, so often I don't do it. But I do lift weights very lightly, and I'm a huge Jerry Seinfeld fan. So please tell me that connection. So
yeah, I think it's great. For myself, I used to go to World Gym in Santa Monica, and I write in the book about all the characters we met, and it was really interesting. And especially knowing Arnold Schwarzenegger all the time, seeing him in the morning. And he was such a lively fellow, and just whenever he came into the gym, the whole place lit up. And he's such a great guy. We had a few meals together, lunch, breakfast, and things. He always gave me great advice for real estate. I paid attention because he was really smart.
Yeah.
So. But since then, I decided to build a home gym. And right now, we live in a house in Los Angeles that is kind of far from the street. And so I built a garage gym. And what I do is I back up the car so that park it so that people can't see the gym from the street. All they see is a car. And I then bring the equipment outside. I do a lot of indoor, outdoor workouts. And it's almost like a Zen meditative experience. If I go out at 6 a.m. and I'm working out, I've seen orange sunrises. I've seen purple skies. It's just magnificent, pink. And yeah, it grounds you.
I'm glad you're touching this, Rick, because a lot of guests I've had in here, I've had psychiatrists, psychologists, and I had a colleague of mine, Edie Greenblatt, who is an organizational development consultant and executive coach. And her entree into this field was dance. She's a world dancer. And world teaches it and practices it. And so often those of us in the cognitive realm, which is most of this audience, we all live up here, and don't we lose contact, or don't we lose our sense of physicality?
I think we do. And I think you don't need a lot. If you do, I know it sounds like a lot, but 6 hours a week, however you do that. And I do typically 1.5 hour workouts 4 times a week or something like that. I mix it up. The key to working out is find exercises, an exercise program that you really like, that you enjoy. This came up, and I tell the story in the book, where my daughter, Sarah, who's now in her 40s.
And Georgetown grad too.
No, she's NYU. My son, Jack, is Georgetown. And so we were, though she was baptized in Dahlgren Chapel. My father, Davis, who married Carol and me in Dahlgren Chapel. So we have strong Georgetown connections. But we were skiing in Canada at Whistler, and after skiing all day, we were in the hotel room. And Sarah was about 22. She had just graduated from college. She was living in New York, about to go to law school, and she had hired a personal trainer. And we were sitting around the hotel room, and she said, relaxing after skiing all day, and she said, "Dad, you've been training your whole life." And I got to tell you, this personal trainer, he said, the best workout is 20 minutes of stretching, 20 minutes of cardio, and 20 minutes of resistance. Now, do you agree with him? And I said, well, Sarah, all three are good: stretching, cardio, and resistance, weights. But I thought about it, and I thought about her eventual husband, Brian, who gets up every morning and runs 2 to 4 miles. He loves it. And I
used to do it until my knees went out.
There you go. Then there's our son Jack, who at the time was doing triathlons, and he also when he was at Georgetown, he led a Gold's Gym class in Arlington, Virginia, every Sunday night. So he was Mr. Fitness.
Yeah.
He liked his way of training. Sarah herself became so good at yoga that she was a certified yoga instructor. And my wife, Carol, walks 2 to 4 miles every day, religiously, and stays in shape that way. And I started thinking about it. I thought, you know what, Sarah? Everybody wants to exercise. We know we should. We know it's good for us. But most people don't because they don't like it. So the key is to find what you like, whether it's yoga or triathlons or jogging or walking or weights. And the best workout is the one you like enough to keep doing it. So that's the theme of the book.
Thank you for that connection. So often things I like exercise because we don't like it. But thank you for that lesson and emphasizing it. So
it's like Oprah Winfrey. She's got tremendous discipline and she works out all the time. But I saw her interviewed a couple of years ago for a New Year's resolution, and she said something about sticking with my workouts. I just hate them, but I know it's good for me, so I'll stick with it. And I wanted to say, Oprah, we've got to find workouts that you don't hate, that you actually love. Yeah. Like think back to when you were a little kid in grade school. And the classroom, I grew up in suburban Chicago. And so when it was, freezing outside, they'd have the radiators up so hot, you'd be 100 degrees inside. And anyway, but when we had recess, we'd run out to the playground and kick a ball and run around and play games. And it was fun. Yeah. We looked forward to that. Well, if you can figure out how to make your workouts like that, that's the key to the whole thing.
Right. And it was interesting, the connection to meditation, which is this sense of focusing on the present, but getting inside your mind. And then with the weightlifting, as Seinfeld had done, it's an ideal combination.
I think so too. I think now a lot of people, the younger people today, the gyms are a social atmosphere.
Right? I said, everyone's younger than we are, Rick.
Yep. So, but they're classes, they're more, you go to the gym for socializing with the iPhone and so on. Whereas I remember when I started with Franco Colombo, he said the most important thing is to block out all distractions and just concentrate on the muscles that you're working.
Great. Time is racing by, but I want to give you the opportunity that every guest shares in, and it's a story of grace, and you have a particular link to grace in your book, do you not? So,
well, in the last chapter, I talk about these aging clinics that are very popular in California, Florida, and other places. And they're run by medical doctors, and they recommend small amounts of testosterone shots or human growth hormone shots as a way to stay youthful. And for myself, I can understand their appeal, and so I don't criticize anybody who goes to an aging clinic. But for myself, I like role models. I mentioned this Mr. France, Guy Mirzik, was a role model for building muscles. My role model for aging is Jack LaLanne. And he lived to 96, and he had such a tremendous energy and positive outlook. Now, if you watch his shows, you can see them on YouTube or read his books. You'll see he had a message of love and gratitude and feeling. The whole theme, or at least this is my interpretation. This is what I recommend and talk about in the last chapter. The most important thing for good health is to be filled up with good feelings, to love yourself and to love other people, so that you feel good and you want to help other people. I mean, in some ways, I didn't need to write this book to make money. The business has been very successful. If I could give away this book, I would. That's why I mentioned that my brother is a very good filmmaker, and he made a YouTube video, a mini documentary, 25 minutes. So if you don't want to read the book, you can watch the movie.
Don't say that, Rick. You want people to buy the book.
Well, I think when you see the movie, then it's worth, because I tell lots of stories. I mean, one of the people who had a big influence on me is sitting in a prison right now for killing 2 people. I mean, there are a lot of interesting stories.
Yeah. Well, we will put the link to that, your documentary, in the notes for the film. So, Rick, it's been a great opportunity to have you. You are a man of grace who's taught me, and so I owe you, my friend. And so how can people find you? We're going to find
you can find the book on Amazon. That's, the 800-pound gorilla. But also on Creators Publishing or creators.com, where they have links to Barnes and Noble and the Apple books and others.
Great. Rick, it's been a pleasure to have you. And with that, we will go out. Thank you.
Thank you, John.